It's serious stuff, Charles, and you're going to have a look here at the rules coming in to clamp down even further on anybody who stands up to challenge what's actually happening in UK.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Brian. Yes, in the last few weeks, we've spoken about the extension, really, of the definition of terrorism and what it may be seen to be encompassing, not forgetting, of course, that the original definition was really to do with the acts of government. So that's what we'll return to probably in a few minutes. But last week, I spoke about Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act, and I'd just like to make a clarification because I spoke specifically about the right to silence, which does exist under the Terrorism Act 2000, but not specifically under Schedule 7. And just as a demonstration of the breadth and the willingness of the UK column audience to help out and get involved, I've spoken to a former police officer with accreditation on the Schedule 7 side of things, which applies explicitly to ports within the UK. And it was a fascinating and enlightening conversation. But essentially, the bottom line is that if you are taken to one side under Schedule 7, then you are compelled to answer any question put to you. So I've got a slide to demonstrate the particular part of the Act here. So a person who's questioned under paragraph 203 basically meaning that if you're within the confines of a port, then you must give the examining officer any information in his possession which the officer requests. So you may also be asked for a passport or a photograph or an identity document, and also to declare whether you have any documents, but also to give the examining officer on request any document which he has with him and which is of a kind specified by the officer. So just, again, a further recap as to how somebody may be stopped under Schedule 7. And effectively, this applies, as I say, to ports. But the specific point here is that it's to determine whether or not that person is or has been concerned with the commission, preparation or instigation of acts of terrorism. But of course, it's fairly wide net, and there doesn't need to be any specific element of suspicion to determine that. Now, statistically, we look at the Home Office provision from June of this year, and it's enlightening to see that of the 2,500 people that were pulled to one side under Schedule 7, at least 59% of those, 1,580 out of that 2,689 examinations, had biometric identifiers taken. Now, it's easy to see how this could be exploited, and I'm calling this biometric harvesting. So what they mean by that, biometric identifier includes photographs, fingerprints, and DNA samples. And last week I talked about this being a fishing expedition due to the fact that to question or examine somebody under Schedule 7 doesn't require any specific intelligence. But the 2,500 figure from the year to March of this year was a 96% decrease since the data was first collected in 2012, when a staggering 63,902 people were examined under Schedule 7. But still, the Home Office has the gall to say that there are a range of safeguards and measures in place to ensure appropriate use of the powers. But just to demonstrate how public scrutiny may affect itself in a positive sense, due to the increase in public scrutiny of the powers, there has been what they're calling a more targeted approach. Essentially, they've not been able to get away with what they were doing previously, which was just to pull anybody aside. And as I say, with the biometric harvesting in mind, this is very significant. But also, it's increased the rate of detention proportionally up to 65%, which has resulted in detention. Now, Keir Starmer spoke last week about police using existing powers and, of course, the unchecked rollout of facial recognition technology. Now, this is a slide from Liberty, which had what they're describing as a groundbreaking victory on a human rights basis to do with privacy back in 2020. But that's largely been completely forgotten and ignored. And, of course, police have more and more powers to use facial recognition, and there's very little that seems to have been done to check it. So we'll just look at some of the potential pitfalls from the National Cyber Security Centre. It's actually going back some years. This was written in 2019. But of course, it tells us how biometrics are attacked. And the government are constantly insisting these technological advancements and platforms are invulnerable and they will keep us safe and secure. But the truth is always, or almost always, the opposite. So under biometric vulnerability, they say that all modalities are vulnerable. And the points at which the biometric system can be attacked and how they can be implemented are shown most obviously in what's called a presentation attack, which is basically an imposter using what's called an artifact to mimic an individual who has been enrolled in the system. So when we think back to what Schedule 7 enables, the collection of such data, so if a fingerprint of an enrolled individual is captured, or indeed for facial recognition, a portrait, then that could be used to create an artifact. And we hear about the cooperation of the individual. Well, of course, they're compelled to cooperate. And then without such cooperation, it can be much more challenging to obtain this. So the point of this is really just to state that in using such legislation, and Starmer was very clear that he wanted to, rather than create new laws, he wanted to use existing capabilities. And we see here how terrorism, in particular, the Terrorism Act and Schedule 7, is just another way in which biometric data is taken into a system. And of course, the other question is that the control of this, who is it that's designed these particular systems? Are they from within or without of this country? And indeed, where does the data go? That's one side of it. Of course, the other is, quite rightly, as they point out here, the vulnerability of it to anybody that's able to hack into any of these things. So it's not difficult to see how such data could be used against somebody that's been taken aside for a Schedule 7 examination.
Charles, thank you for that. So let's stress the situation here. As the violence goes up in UK, as people turn on each other, so the government can bring in more and more draconian controls, which ultimately are targeted each and every man, woman and child in this country. This is a police state. It's in power. It's now starting to show itself for what it really is. And the more people engage in protest against each other in communities or violence on the streets, the more this agenda is going to come in. So we're going to once again say immigration is a problem, of course. Should mass immigration be stopped? Absolutely. But this has to be stopped by targeting the root cause of the problem, which is political doctrine. Farage has mentioned the word Marxism. I would say a variant of Marxism, which has been unleashed through both the major political parties, both Labour and Conservatives. And people need to see this danger, because if they focus on attacking and getting annoyed with other members of the community of what colour, what race, then they are going to miss the point of what's really coming. This is very, very dangerous. And of course, the government, whether Conservative or Labour, is the same government which is happy to prosecute unlawful wars overseas, be it in Ukraine or in the